So in this lecture, we'll discuss rhetorical slanter, otherwise known as rhetorical devices. These are terms and phrases we often use to make people feel a certain way about something. The idea is that when we come to a belief about a claim, we're not just influenced by logic and reason, but we're also influenced by how we feel. So if you recall from last time, we said that rhetoric is the use of the psychological force of expressions to influence our attitudes. So expressions, terms, phrases, how something is said can psychologically move us to feel a certain way about a belief or a claim. This is in contrast to logic or reason, where instead of looking for evidence that seemingly supports a belief, rhetoric will use words and phrases to make us feel a certain way about the claim so that we are persuaded to believe what somebody wants us to believe. So rhetoric tries to persuade through how something is said, right? Rather than what is said. So rhetoric is the art of persuasion, while arguments are things that seek to establish a conclusion, meaning they are ways in which we can prove or provide evidence to show the conclusion to be true. This also means then that arguments can have rhetoric in them. In fact, this is a very useful approach to trying to convince somebody of your point, not just to appeal to their sense of reason by giving premises that support your conclusion, but by also saying your argument in a certain way, using certain words and terms so that people aren't just thinking about your argument, they are feeling it too. Also, recall from last time, we said that rhetoric isn't necessarily bad, right? You can be persuading people to believe things for just reasons, for good reasons. You can imagine kids being persuaded by teachers or parents to do things or believe certain things for their own benefit. But we also noted that rhetoric can be used to promote, ill will towards certain people. It can be used to galvanize people in a way to believe something that leads to bad consequences. So here is a list of various forms of rhetorical devices or rhetorical slanter, right? We'll talk about euphemism and dysphemism. We'll talk about rhetorical analogies, rhetorical definitions, and rhetorical explanations. We'll talk about innuendo and loaded questions. We'll discuss hyperbole and stereotypes and ridicule and sarcasm. We'll take a look at weaselers and downplayers and proof surrogates. Okay, so lots to cover in this video. Here's a cartoon. One girl is asking one boy, "What's up with your mom's stomach?" The boy, he replies, "She says Dad touched her with his magic wand, but I reckon she's up to duff." Here, magic wand is a term for something else that I'm assuming you can figure out on your own. The term magic wand is used in this case as a euphemism. Euphemism is a language to make something sound better. So you can imagine, or you probably have heard news reports that talk about military action, and they'll say things like there was collateral damage. Collateral damage is a nicer way of talking about civilian deaths, right? Civilian casualties. So collateral damage is a euphemism. Pornography, you can think of the phrase adult entertainment as being synonymous with pornography. And adult entertainment is meant to be a euphemism, as meant to be a more pleasant way of saying pornography. What about prison? Can you think of alternative phrases or terms for prison to make prison sound a little more appealing? Well, there's the term correctional facility, right? Correctional facility doesn't carry as much negative connotations as prison, perhaps. How about the extermination of a group of people, right? This is pretty horrific sorts of things to happen, but you'll often hear the term ethnic cleansing. And that's a euphemism. So dictators or tyrants will often talk about ethnic cleansing because it sounds a little bit more positive than extermination. How about somebody that has sexual intercourse with multiple partners? Can you think of various euphemisms for that? Things like sleeping around, right? Okay, so those are examples of euphemisms. Dysphemisms are the opposite. Dysphemisms are language to make something sound worse. So you can maybe recall people referring to potato chips as junk food, or any sort of snack like candy bars as junk food, right? Junk food is a derogatory term. It's a dysphemism. It's a term to make something sound worse. How about an older person? Have you ever heard somebody make fun of an older person or use a term that means older person in order to put them down? And maybe something like geezer, right? That geezer. Now, a dysphemism doesn't occur by just saying, by just putting a different phrase or term in front of something else. So if you want to talk about receiving a bad grade, a dysphemism wouldn't be John really received an awful grade. Right? That's not really a dysphemism because you're still using the original term within your phrasing. Right? A dysphemism would be changing the term bad grade to something more horrific, like John laid an egg on that exam. Right? So can you find the dysphemism in the following passage? Rush Limbaugh said, "The basic right to life of an animal, which is the source of energy for many animal rights wackos, must be inferred from the anti-cruelty laws humans have written." So can you identify a term or a phrase he uses where he could have easily used a more neutral term or phrase, but instead chose certain words to elicit a certain emotional response? He used certain words to make something sound worse than it actually is, or than it may be. Well, here he uses the phrase animal rights wackos, and that carries some negative connotations, right? To call something a wacko means they're kind of not all there with their senses and their ability to think clearly. So animal rights wackos is a dysphemism for just the term activists, right? Or somebody that believes in a cause. Both of those are much more neutral than saying animal rights wackos. Hence, it's a dysphemism. Okay, what's happening here in this cartoon? A young man talks about his experience with a doctor, and he says the needle was this big, holding out his arms, right? As another patient is terrified as she listens to him. Well, what we see is him using hyperbole. This is overstatement or exaggeration. If somebody says, Bob is so generous, he'd give you the shirt off of his back, meaning that he would, if you asked for a shirt, he would even take it off of what he's wearing. He'd even take it off of himself to give it to you. Right? That's oftentimes an exaggeration, right? He'd give you the shirt off his back. If I said to you, I'd give you my left arm for the Raiders to win another Super Bowl. Well, I wouldn't really give you my left arm, but it's a way of stating how much I love the Raiders, right? So you can see language here used to elicit an emotional response, and the type of language is some sort of exaggeration, some sort of overstatement. How about this? If somebody says, I can't believe she's marrying him, you know how unreliable those hippies are. Well, by using the term hippies, this person is referring to a stereotype, right? And a stereotype is to associate something with a popular, sometimes negatively held image of a group. So what this does is it cuts down on how much thinking is involved when you present an argument to somebody, because you can use a stereotype and they can get a feeling, an emotional response, because people are often familiar with stereotypes, right? So if somebody says, of course she acted that way, she's a blonde, okay, it refers to the stereotype of blondes. And when somebody hears it, they have an emotional response based upon what they know of the stereotype, and then now they see the person a certain way. Now, let's compare dysphemisms with stereotypes, because oftentimes they can be confused for one or the other. So a dysphemism is inherently negative, right? And it usually is applied, or it can be applied to several different types of things. It can be applied to events, it can be applied to people. Stereotypes can be negative, but it can also be positive, right? It can represent a group in a positive light. You can say something like, or maybe you've heard the stereotype, oh, yeah, John, he doesn't have to study, or of course he's going to ace the test. He's Asian. Well, to say somebody's studious, to say somebody's smart, this is positive light, but it's still a stereotype. You're still painting a broad brush of a group of people, right? Which leads to the second difference between a stereotype and a dysphemism, and that's stereotypes often refer to people. Obviously, I'm hoping you see there are lots of issues with using stereotypes. One is that it reduces people to a category. Instead of seeing people for who they are individually, we now only see them through the category or the broad brush that we paint them with. And two, as I mentioned a second ago, is that stereotypes are shortcuts, right? Instead of actually having to think about something carefully, a stereotype kind of gives us a snapshot of an idea or an issue and prevents us from often thinking more carefully about what somebody is saying. You can imagine how politicians or people that are just trying to rile up groups will use stereotypes, right, to appeal to individuals' broad ideas of certain groups. And oftentimes, if they're negative ideas of certain groups, it motivates people based upon fear or anger to believe something. What device is used here? I can't believe my so-called doctor prescribed me medication for my high blood pressure. I'm just under a lot of stress at work. So hopefully you realize or recognize the term so-called, which we used earlier, right? And in a similar way, psychologically speaking, the term just has the same effect, right? Just under a lot of stress at work. These act as downplayers. These are terms that make something or someone look less important or less significant, right? So terms like merely or so-called or just downplay the significance. They downplay the importance of something or the credibility of someone. There's no such thing as global warming. These self-appointed experts on the environment are trying to scare us, right? So the term self-appointed here was used to downplay the expertise of these scientists, right? These self-appointed experts. Also, anytime you see terms in quotes, or people, like if you're talking to somebody and they use the hand gesture, quotation marks, they often do that to downplay something or somebody, right? To make something or someone seem less significant. My so-called doctor, or they'll say my doctor, as if to downplay the credibility or significance of that person. What device is used here? You should get your family ready for when the aliens finally attack us. Everybody knows that Martians landed in Area 51. Okay, so how are they trying to elicit a psychological response from us? How are they using terms to trigger our feelings and emotions? Well, the phrase everybody knows, right, kind of makes us want to also believe it. Otherwise, we'd be in the outside looking in. Otherwise, maybe people think of us as being foolish for not already knowing it, right? Everybody knows. So that phrase is used as a proof surrogate. These are expressions used to suggest evidence for a claim without actually providing the evidence, right? So when somebody says, clearly she shouldn't have done that, the term clearly there is a proof surrogate. You hear it, and unconsciously, we don't want to be the foolish one who doesn't clearly see it. We don't want to be the person people make fun of for not already knowing it. So there's a part of us that wants to then also believe it because it should be clear to us that it's true, right? Clearly she shouldn't have done that. So clearly is used instead of actually providing evidence. Diet soda is unhealthy. Just check the latest data. So that second sentence, right? Just check the latest data doesn't actually tell us the data that supports the claim that diet soda is unhealthy. So the phrase just check the latest data is itself a proof surrogate, right? How about innuendo? Well, innuendo is a rhetorical device that uses suggestive language that implies something without explicitly saying it, right? So you may provide a sentence or a phrase that doesn't overtly and explicitly say what you mean, but people kind of understand, right? They can read between the lines. So if you say something like, "Far be it from me to call my opponents liars," well, what are you doing? You're actually calling your opponents liars, right? You're not saying they are explicitly, but the phrase, "Far be it from me to call my opponents liars," you're saying your opponents are liars. You're implying it. I didn't say Bush invaded Iraq to help his buddies in the oil industry. I just said his buddies have done very well since the invasion. Right? So that last sentence, I just said his buddies have done very well since the invasion. I didn't say Bush invaded Iraq to help his buddies in the oil industry. Okay, so those two sentences imply that's what you believe he did, right? You don't say it explicitly. You, in fact, say the opposite. You say, I didn't say, right? I didn't say Bush invaded Iraq to help his buddies in the oil industry. But just by saying I didn't say, you're implying that's what you mean. You're implying this is exactly what you mean, that he did it in order to benefit and in order for his friends to benefit financially from it, right? This is all innuendo, using language to imply something without actually saying it. So if somebody said to you, hey, well, if somebody said, no, you said Bush invaded Iraq to make money, you can say, no, I didn't, right? I didn't say that because of the way you phrased it. Or if you want to say your opponents are liars and you say, far be it from me to call my opponents liars, you have defended yourself, or you have made it so that people can't say you called your opponents liars, right? What device is used here? What did you use to get rid of that stain in your underwear? Well, you haven't proven that somebody has a stain in their underwear. You haven't even said or made the claim that somebody has a stain in their underwear. But by just asking the question, you've kind of implied it, right? By asking the question, people that are listening to the conversation will now believe that this person has a stain in their underwear. This is a loaded question. So a loaded question is a suggestive question that rests on an assumption that hasn't been established, right? So if somebody says, when did you stop cheating on your boyfriend? Well, you didn't make a claim that this person cheated on their, make a claim that this person cheated on their boyfriend, and you haven't provided any evidence for it. By just asking the question, people are now going to start to have the idea that somebody cheated on their boyfriend. Or if you said, hey, have you stopped beating on your wife yet? Well, you haven't proven that somebody has beaten on their wife. You haven't even said and made the claim that they have. But by asking the question, you've now implied it, and people that are listening now have the idea that it's true, right? So you'll often hear this in politics where people say things in this way to make a claim or to make a statement about an opponent, right? By just asking the question or phrasing a statement in the form of a question, a loaded question, they can imply things to be true about sort of their opponents without actually having to say it. So what device is used here? A class asks its teacher, is it true that Earth is a third planet from the sun? And let's say the teacher doesn't know. The teacher might say something like, as far as I know. Well, what did they just do there? They used a Weaseler. A Weaseler is language that shows uncertainty in order to shield oneself from criticism. So when the teacher says, as far as I know, well, in case that they are wrong, they don't have to be held to that, right? Because they said as far as they knew. They didn't claim it was a true statement. By the way, it is true. Earth is the third planet from the sun. But it's a way for them to have an out, right? In case they are wrong about something. So when somebody says, this may cure your problem, the term may is a Weaseler. You can imagine discussing your headache, and your buddy goes, here's some ginger root tea. This may cure your problem. Well, in case it doesn't cure your headache, they have an out, right? They said it may cure your problem. They didn't say it definitively did. So the term may gives them a way to deny that they actually said this would cure your problem. You can imagine a conversation where there is a belief that may be controversial. Maybe you have a conversation about aliens and your friend talks about how he believes in aliens, and you go, yes, I agree with you in a way. Well, the term in a way allows you to make them feel good about believing in aliens. You go, yeah, I agree with you in a way, but again, it gives you an out. If your other friend who's listening to the conversation goes, you really? You believed in aliens 5 minutes ago? No. I said in a way, right? I didn't really say I believed in aliens. I just said, kind of in a way. So in a way is used as a Weaseler. How about this? Can you spot the Weaseler here? You may just be the smartest class I have ever had. Well, again, the term may here is used as the Weaseler, right? A teacher can tell this to their class, make them feel good, but not really mean it. The term may there gives them an out. So hopefully you can see that words like may or perhaps or possibly or tend to or phrases like as far as I know, these are all ways of shielding oneself from criticism, because you can kind of say you believe something, but then these terms allow you to go, no. I didn't really believe it. I just said perhaps it was true or possibly it was true, right? Okay. What device is used here? Student says, so I guess a 45% on the exam means I should study harder. And a fellow classmate responds, no, getting less than half of the questions correct is great. You're a real genius. So with the sentence getting less than half of the questions correct is great and the term real genius, both of those are examples of sarcasm. Sarcasm is using complimentary language for the purpose of insulting or ridiculing something or someone, right? So this helps people avoid arguing a position, because instead of arguing a position, you just make fun of it with ironic statements. So if you take a look at the previous example, no, getting less than half the questions correct is great. Well, that sounds positive because you call it great, right? But you're really making fun of them. You call them a real genius. Well, calling somebody a genius in general, that's a positive thing. But here they're using it sarcastically. They're using it in a way that makes fun of them and shows that you think they're not very smart, right? That they're not very good at being a student. Okay. So if I said, Hillary Clinton made a great speech last night, everyone awakened feeling refreshed. Well, the idea of waking up feeling refreshed sounds good, but it also implies that she made you fall asleep because her speech was boring, right? So the phrase, everyone awakened feeling refreshed, is sarcasm. It sounds complimentary, but it's really used to insult somebody. I don't have to say or make an argument for why Clinton's speech wasn't very good. Instead, I am just making fun of her using ironic statements. And by making fun of her, maybe people can now start to be swayed to a certain belief or opinion that somebody else has about Hillary Clinton, right? So that's the power and use of sarcasm. Let's take a look at other ways of using language to convey an attitude. So there are rhetorical definitions. So rhetorical definitions are definitions, providing a definition that has an emotional impact to it. So if I said an environmentalist is a tree-hugging extremist, right? The speaker obviously has a perspective on environmentalists. They're obviously saying they don't believe in a lot of what environmentalists do or what a lot of environmentalists believe in. So instead, they provide us a rhetorical definition, a definition that provides us with some sort of, or that's meant to provide us with an emotional experience. An environmentalist is a tree-hugging extremist. So the phrase tree-hugging extremist is this person's definition of environmentalist, right? Again, it's meant to elicit an emotional, psychological response. There are also rhetorical explanations, which are kind of similar. So as an example, the reason environmentalists won't let you cut down a tree is that they want to put everyone out of work. Okay, so here, obviously, again, the speaker has a bias. They have a particular perspective on who environmentalists are. They don't agree with them. They don't agree with what they believe in. So instead, they give an explanation. But it's not a very factual explanation. It's a rhetorical explanation. It's an explanation specifically there to elicit an emotional response from the listener. The reason environmentalists won't let you cut down a tree is that they want to put everyone out of work, right? It's not a formal definition or a formal explanation. It is an explanation specifically used to elicit an emotional reaction. And then lastly, for at least this video, there are rhetorical analogies, which are comparisons between things. So, again, for this type of person that has this view on environmentalists, they might say something like, your average environmentalist is about as smart as a toilet seat. So this person is making comparison. Again, it's not a very, it's not a literal comparison, right? They're not trying to compare something to provide us with an argument to believe something. They are giving us a comparison to specifically elicit an emotional response by calling or by comparing somebody to a toilet seat, right? You are trying to elicit a response based upon a negative connotation. Okay? See, these are all tools that people often use. All these devices are tools people often use to elicit in a psychological reaction, to bypass reasoning in order to get the listener to come to a belief about a claim. So let's see how good we are at identifying various rhetorical devices. Okay, so let's practice. It's not impossible for him to have committed adultery. So if somebody phrased it this way, what are they doing? What sort of device are they using? Can you see? It's not impossible for him to have committed adultery. Well, they're using a Weaseler by saying it's not impossible, right? They're kind of insinuating the idea that they committed adultery without necessarily explicitly saying that, right? They have an out for themselves. It's not impossible. It gives themselves an out. If somebody said, obviously, we should have never invaded Canada, well, the term obviously is used there to a certain effect, right? They're trying to make you believe that we should have never invaded Canada, but instead of giving you an argument for it, they say it's obvious. Well, that acts as a proof surrogate. How about this one? I don't know what my opponents will base their speech on, but I'm basing mine on love for my country. Well, here, right, they're kind of implying that their opponents don't really love their country. They're not saying it explicitly, but they're insinuating it, right? They're using innuendo. How about this example? Smokers unite. The reason the anti-smoking crowd doesn't want you to smoke can be summed up in a single word: dictatorship. Okay. Hopefully you can recognize that they use a rhetorical explanation here, right? That second sentence tries to explain why certain people don't want you to, why certain people want to pass anti-smoking laws, and their explanation is dictatorship, right? It's a rhetorical explanation. How about this example? We can generate more funds for schools through revenue enhancements from the sale of beer and cigarettes. Okay, well, the phrase revenue enhancements, well, that's a phrase or a term meant to make something else sound better, right? In this case, taxes. So this is a euphemism. How about this? Nice outfit, part of Macy's lady deterrent line. Okay, so within stores, clothing stores, they'll have different clothing lines. This person has looked at your outfit or somebody's outfit and said, nice outfit. Is that part of Macy's lady deterrent line? Well, deterrent means to push people away, right? So they're making fun of these. They're making fun of you for your outfit, and they use the phrase lady deterrent line. So you can see this in a couple ways. We can see it as sarcasm because they say nice outfit and they don't really mean it, so that's sarcastic. You can also look at the term lady deterrent line, and that is used as a dysphemism instead of just saying clothing line, or instead of talking about specifically what you're wearing, right? They use a phrase to make it sound worse than it is: lady deterrent line. Perhaps the religious leaders who testified at the State Board of Education's public hearing on textbooks think they speak for all Christians, but they don't. Well, in this case, it's not a phrase per se, that's the rhetorical device. It's the term in quotations, right? By placing the term religious leaders in quotes, you are, in fact, downplaying them as religious leaders. How about the following? Carrot Top, who's a comedian, if you didn't know. Carrot Top, yeah, he's about as funny as a terminal illness. Okay, well, terminal illness is being used in comparison to carrot top, right? So it's a rhetorical analogy. They're comparing carrot top to a terminal illness. How about this? Any person who thinks that Libya is not involved in terrorism has the same kind of mentality as people who think that Hitler was not involved in persecuting Jews. Okay, hopefully you recognize that there's a comparison here, right? They're comparing people who have a certain opinion about Libya with people who think Hitler was not involved in genocide, right? So it's an analogy, it's a comparison. A network television anchor once said, "Who is to blame for this lackluster political campaign?" So by saying it, right, by saying this, who is to blame for this lackluster political campaign? They're actually saying that this campaign is lackluster, right? So it's a loaded question. Surely you can't say that the American people have ever been behind Bill Clinton. After all, he got a mere 43 votes in 1992, which is 5 million fewer than George Bush got when he beat Dukakis in 1988. Okay, so hopefully you recognize that term, mere 43 million, right? So they're downplaying how popular Bill Clinton was by saying he got a mere 43 million votes. So if you've had any difficulty with any of these, I would recommend maybe you go through some of these exercises in your textbook. So exercise 5-1, look at numbers 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, and 10, and then choose between euphemism, dysphemism, Weaseler, or downplayers for each of those examples. In exercise 5-5, look at numbers 2, 4, 6, 9, and 10, and then choose between sarcasm, hyperbole, and proof surrogates to see which rhetorical device was used in exercise 5-5. And then for exercise 5-6 and 5-15, follow the instructions and do the following exercises, and then come back. Come back and let's take a look at the answers together. Okay, hopefully you've had a second. Let's see if you are on the right track here. So for exercise 5-1, number 2 is a downplayer, and the use of the term only, right? Only is a downplayer there. Number 4, you see a Weaseler with the term may, so it gives people a way out of actually claiming that they believe this to be true. Number 6, you see the use of dysphemism with the term extremists. With number 8, the term bloated is used as a dysphemism. With number 9, hopefully you recognize the term tinkle as a better way of saying, urinated, or, more a nicer way of saying urinated. And then number 10, the word just, right, is used to downplay the claim. Okay, let's look at exercise 5-5. Number 2, the term tests have shown, or test have shown, is a proof surrogate, right? Instead of actually telling us the test or giving us the results of particular tests, they just say, in general, tests have shown. So they don't really give us the proof. Again, the term anybody who is used as a proof surrogate. Only thing is hyperbole, right? Probably not the only thing here. The term 1,000 years is an exaggeration. So again, hyperbole. And when they said isn't bad, right, that's sarcasm, because it actually is really bad. Okay, 5-6, let's look at number 2. Well, C is a downplayer. It's D, hyperbole. And if you wanted to, you can make an argument for a rhetorical analogy too. So it's a euphemism for number 5, right? Little discussion. Makes it sound better. Let's get rid of that from you. A is number 9 is proof surrogate, right? With the term everybody, with the phrase everybody knows. And number 10 is a euphemism. Normal wear and tear sounds much better, right? So euphemism. 5-15, number 3 is a loaded question. I'm hoping that's obvious. Number 5 is a stereotype. Number 6 is a rhetorical definition. And number 9 is rhetorical explanation, right? Hopefully those help a little bit as you went through them. When we come back, we'll take a look at examples of other questions that you may see in the midterm. We'll also take a look at a midterm preparation worksheet that I'm having you read through. Hopefully you get a chance to review that and come up with some answers, and then we can talk about it in our next video.